Good evening, everyone. In tonight's webinar, we're going to discuss the future direction Irish dairy breeding has to take to address the ever-increasing list of sustainability demands. I'm joined here in studio by experts in genetics from Teagasc and ICBF, and we will also be getting the practical viewpoint of a farmer who has been following the science of dairy breeding for many years. Welcome everyone. We're coming to you live from our studio in Oak Park. We have an exciting panel for you tonight, and just to remind you that we are taking questions through the Q&A function, and we encourage you to ask questions through that throughout the show. Tonight I'm joined here in studio by Professor Donagh Berry, who is the Director of Vistamilk in the SFI Centre and Teagasc Quantitative Geneticist, Dr. Margaret Kelleher, who is a Quantitative Geneticist with the ICBF in Ballincollig, and for the practical viewpoint on how past and future breeding strategies play out on farm, we have County Carlow dairy farmer Philip Donohoo, who, as I said in the intro, has been following the science of dairy breeding for many years. So we are to start with a presentation from Donagh. So Donagh, I'll hand over to you to tell us about the EBI, an economic breeding index for the future.
Thank you, Stuart, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And as Stuart said, I'm going to talk about the EBI, or the Economic Breeding Index. I'm going to focus on three main aspects. What does it currently look like? What have we achieved through selection on the EBI over the last 20 years? And I'm going to finish off with where I see the future for the EBI. But before I dive into that, I want to just take a step back and say, well, why are we interested in breeding? So there's a number of different reasons. Firstly, it's a proven technology. It's not a snake oil. We've shown time and time again. I don't think there's any technology that has been tested as much in Ireland as has breeding. And time again, it shows to have delivered. The gains that we've achieved, they build over time, or they accumulate. So the herds that people have today is a function of the breeding policy for the past few decades. The gains, they can be permanent. So it's not like some non-breeding techniques like feeding. If you stop feeding the animal, then it'll go back in milk production. That doesn't happen with breeding. It holds that potential. We don't need to change the farm management, be it AI or be it stock bulls. It's as easy to use a good bull as it is to use a bad bull. And there's no cost. There's no additional cost of this. Again, not like the non-breeding techniques. Because the cow has to go and calf to produce milk, you've got almost complete adoption rate. And importantly also, it's sustainable. But really, to me, the most important point is it stacks, or it's really complementary to the non-breeding techniques or the advancements that we're currently achieving in management. So what does the EBI look like? Well, the EBI, and this is important, it's only a tool. It's a tool from which we have collapsed huge amounts of information of individual animals into a single value. So underpinning that value, there are what we call subindexes. And you can see the subindexes here on this particular slide. The two main ones, as most of you probably well know, because they're the real drivers of profit in dairy herds, are milk and fertility. And you can see from this graphic that they make up over half the emphasis. A new subindex, which was added at the end of last year, is the carbon subindex. So when we think about breeding, if you think about the bulls that are being picked up at the moment to go into AI, they're not going to inseminate a cow until next year. Then you have a 9-month gestation. You're waiting then 2 years for the calf to become a cow and start producing. So we need to be always thinking into the future. And yes, there's no carbon tax or anything like that on Irish dairy cows, but maybe there will be in the future. So we always need to be ahead of the game. Now, there are the different subindex components, but of course, underpinning those are individual traits. And you can easily go onto the ICBF website, dig into individual bulls. Rather than looking at their milk subindex, you can look at their milk kgs, fat kgs, protein kgs, fat percentage, protein percentage. So as you can see, all of that information of the individual traits has been collapsed into the subindexes, which in turn are being collapsed into a single EBI figure. So what have we achieved? And I'm showing you here in this graphic, at the bottom is the year of calving. So this is the entire Irish dairy herd, the 1.5 million cows that we have at the moment. And on the vertical is the profit per lactation. To lines that most people probably would have seen before. The green is the fertility. So the EBI was launched in around the year 2001, and I brought everything back to zero around then. It took us a while to get the momentum of the breeding program going, but what you can see in around 2008, 2009, fertility started to improve. The bend started to turn upwards, and the profit accruing from fertility improved. Milk, it's almost a straight line going up. The profit from increased milk production per lactation is increasing year on year. So we're increasing our overall profit. Now, a trend that probably many of you, the vast majority of you, haven't seen before is this red one. This is the new carbon subindex, which I just talked about. The numbers are a lot lower, but what we can see is that through the initial years, the carbon subindex values were getting worse. So the profit was reducing. And that's because milk was going up, so the cows were eating more and therefore producing more methane, but fertility was not improving. But look what's happening in the last few years. Our carbon value of our animals is starting to improve. Why? Yes, milk is still going up and these cows are still producing more milk, and therefore we expect them to be producing more methane, but the fertility is improving. So we're getting these cows to produce most of this milk off of the likes of grass. So this is a hugely positive story. You could look at this and say, oh, we're flatlining in carbon. Yes, we are, but we're doing it at the same time as we're increasing milk production. This is an unbelievable story. If we add all these indexes together, we get the EBI, and this is profit per lactation. We have clearly shown that a 1 unit change in profit of the EBI gives you a 2 unit profit change per lactation in a herd. And look what's happened over the last 20 years. Our EBI today is in the national herd is 150 euros greater than what it was 20 years ago. So just purely based on this, our dairy cows today are 300 euros more profitable than what they were 20 years ago. And the other good news about it is when you count for this efficiencies, it equates over that time period to a 14% improvement in the carbon footprint per kilo of milk solids produced over that time period, at the same time as we're also improving nitrogen use efficiency. So is there room for improvement? Yes, we're constantly challenging ourselves. Is there new traits that we should include, or should we do what we're currently doing even better? And MAGS is developing a new fertility subindex, which hopefully we could have launched in the next few months or so. But if we talk about what are the new traits, in order for a trait to be considered in a breeding index like the EBI, it must fulfill 3 criteria. Firstly, it must be important. It must be either economically important, socially important, or environmentally important. 2, there must be genetic differences. There is genetic differences in almost everything. So that's a no-brainer. And 3, and this is often the most difficult one, is it must be measurable. So when I stand back from the index, the EBI, and I look at, well, what could we do better, or what are we missing? I think there's 3 things. First is product quality. So that's milk and meat quality. Yes, we have fat and protein, but can we get down to a more granular level and that point of differentiation compared to other products? The second one relates to efficiencies. So environmental efficiency, methane emissions, etc., the ability to convert feed into milk production better. And then the third one, I think we could do a lot better on, is health and disease. Our cows are going to get older and older as our fertility gets better and better. So I believe that health is going to become our next barrier to achieving sustainable gains. So just Stuart, just before I finish, because it is a real topical thing at the moment, is the whole issue of methane emissions. I'm just going to focus on that second point there. Is there genetic differences amongst Irish dairy cows in how much methane they produce? Simple answer is yes. And this graphic is showing that this is data from Moorpark, where we've measured the methane of individual cows over a whole lactation, right, on grass. What I'm showing you here, look at the methane output on the bottom. So some cows you can see there they're exhaling around 210 grams of methane per day, while there's cows in the extreme almost double it, 400 grams of methane per day. This is what we call the next generation herd in Moorpark, which is the red is the elite. They're the top EBI cows in the country. The blue is the national average. And just for comparative purposes, I also put in the jerseys, which would traditionally be a smaller breed, of course. What you can see is, and you might be disappointed, but you might see, well, okay, there's the elites and the national averages, they're across the whole span. And this is actually what we see. And it stacks up completely with what I just showed you. That the EBI, as we select for higher EBI, we're not actually increasing their methane output. but we're increasing their milk solids. So from a kilo of methane per kilogram of milk solids, we're actually achieving massive genetic gain. So with that, Stuart, I think, look, the future is unbelievably bright. From a breeding perspective, I've shown you why it's so important. I've demonstrated again and again as to we are achieving genetic gain in profit, sustainable profit over that period. And thirdly, I think there is a massive scope for including new traits within our index. So I'll hand over to you, Stuart.
Okay, Donagh, so thanks very much for that presentation. So just while you're coming back to join us, I'll just make a comment on some of what you said there. So €300 more profitable, which is the equivalent in the national herd of about €30,000 more for every dairy farmer when we take a 100 cow average herd. That's a very significant amount of money for dairy farmers and really emphasizes the importance of EBI. And the other thing that you said is the importance of how that's both additive and cumulative. So the breeding decisions that people are going to make over the next month or 6 weeks are going to have consequences and impacts for them on their farms for a number of years. So I suppose just to start with a few questions for you. On the slides there, you showed that milk has always been increasing even since the advent of EBI, which would be contrary maybe to what people would believe. There's a perception there that EBI is kind of going against milk in a lot of cases. But the fertility was very slow to move. And it looks like to me that on that graph, it was coinciding with the introduction of the genomics that the fertility started to lift. So how important has genomics been to the EBI and I suppose breeding in Ireland?
Yeah, so probably what we're seeing there is an artifact of the old RBI. I'm not sure if you're too young to remember the RBI, Stuart, but that was milk-based. So we already had that breeding program driving us for milk. And what I said, look, is we have to look into the future, right? So the EBI came in 2001. So bulls were picked up in 2002. Right, they didn't go into cows until 2003. The calves weren't born until 2004. Didn't start milking until 2006. So that's purely what that was about. Now, genomics is revolutionized things, right? So where is genomics really useful for? Useful for traits that you can only measure in one sex, right? And I've never seen anybody milk a bull before, right? So you want to know, you don't want to wait for the bull to have daughters. You want to be able to look at the bull's DNA and see is his daughter's going to be good for milking. You want it's really good for traits that take a long time to measure. Right, so you have to wait for the calf to be born to produce the cow. Like these things are kind of different in beef and the sheep because you can measure growth in the males and the females. You can measure it early in life. The other real one, this is where the fertility one is important, is what we call low heritability. Because if you look at a bull, right, any bull on the bull list, you'll see the reliability or the accuracy for his milk proof is always going to be higher than his fertility proof. Right, because it just takes a lot more information to drive that fertility proof up higher for reliability. That's where genomics is really, really useful for. So with genomics, I would argue it's had a bigger impact on the health traits and the fertility traits in driving genetic gain on those particular ones.
Okay, and just coming to the comment I was making as you were returning to your seat there, that additive and cumulative nature of genetics is probably something that, while it's very simple to understand, maybe people don't get the full concept of it. And I know we were talking maybe earlier about the impact of decisions on some farms this year in light of maybe bending, kind of knee-jerk reactions to scenarios, I suppose. What's your comments on that in relation to like the impact that 1 year's bad decision making could do to a herd is quite significant, is it?
Yeah, it's really, really important, Stuart. I often make that play of cumulative and permanent being a positive attribute, but you can so easily flip that on the reverse. And that's what happened pre-EBI, is we were making bad breeding decisions, right? And looking into the future, and this is the purpose of kind of the next generation herd, is we need to be sure that what we're currently breeding for isn't going backwards in any particular traits. And as I said when I was giving the talk, it's not like feeding, right? So if, you know, Philip, when the prices are up this year of feed prices or whatever, you take them out and the cows will drop the yield and you might put them back in next year and the yield will go back up. Doesn't happen with breeding. Imagine if you introduce bad genes for fertility, bad genes for lameness, bad genes for mastitis. Just pick bad bulls this year. Take your eye off the ball. It's going to be generations before you can actually purge them out of your herd, right? So it's a positive, but Jesus, it could be a real negative as well.
Okay. And Philip, again, talking to you earlier in the week, you actually commented that you had very poor fertility in your herd many years ago as a function of the type of cow that was being bred through that RBI that Donagh, I do remember Donagh, I'm old enough to remember that as well. Your comment in terms of you started breeding for fertility, and fertility is still quite a strong emphasis for you. but it took a while to do it, but you could see it actually beginning to do it. So following the science, as EBI had started to drive for, has delivered for you in that sense.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was at the lowest point in our breeding performance was we had a conception rate 1 year 44%, you know, and this was back around in the late 90s. And yeah, I mean, I had to look at some way of doing it. We didn't have EBI at the time. We didn't have fertility indexes of any description. So I was looking to see where I could get them. And I got him in New Zealand. But then very shortly after the EBI came in, and I embraced it immediately because I could see how fertility, how I could measure fertility, because that's where I was very, very weak on. And it has paid dividends. You know, we have 6-week calving rate now of, you know, the mid-80s, like, so yeah, it has worked, absolutely.
And staying with the fertility theme then, Margaret, Donagh has said that you're developing a new fertility index or changes to the fertility index. What are they going to look like maybe for, as we said, we're talking about trying to breed better cows for the future. Is there going to be a big change in that, or?
Well, Stuart, it's a research model that we're looking into. I mean, there's been a dramatic change in the national herd over the last number of years, and fertility is playing such a crucial role. What we have at the moment has played a very important role in terms of getting us to those levels of high fertility in our herds, but we're trying to just nudge it forward. Can we find other traits of importance within the fertility subindex? So look, I mean, what we have there is calving interval and survival. We are looking at traits very similar to that, but we're probably trying to focus more on the seasonal type herds for some herds, not forgetting the non-seasonal herds. But we also have new types of data in as well. So all your mating records, that's data that's really, really important to kind of pick up the early indicators of fertility. So, you know, there's a few different traits on the table. It's not finalized yet, but it's work in progress.
Okay, and so I suppose farmers themselves won't really see a big change in terms of the EBI report, because as Donagh said, it's all that data that you talked about there now is going to be all compressed into one, and it'll still manifest itself in the form of a fertility figure within its EBI, and it's only the traits that are contributing to it are going to be important.
Definitely, yeah. It's so crucial within the EBI that, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So Donagh, you're talking about the methane emissions there. There's a question after coming in through the Q&A there. What's the link between daily methane and daily milk solids? Is it all driven by intake? And if we select for low methane, could we actually be seeing some negative results?
Yeah, we don't know to answer that one. We know at a management level, cows that milk more, they have to get it from somewhere. Yeah. So they eat more. And where does methane come from other than the digestion of feed? Yeah. So we currently have data on 323 animals. Now that's not enough to do some good genetic analysis, but so the answer is don't know, but we're building the data set to be able to estimate it. Now, just remember, we'd never be recommending selecting on an individual trait. Yes. So if we were to select on methane, it would be in the framework of EBI, which is making sure we don't go back in fertility, we don't go back to 1990s, Philip. We drive up our milk solids, maintain cow size, maintain health, maintain beef merit, etc.
Going back to the €300 you mentioned there earlier, and that's over a 25-year period now or so. What kind of, and like there's been significant gains there. Like, I mean, I always think of it in the context of the protein 350 competition. That was a big objective for people in the past. And now Philip is talking about potentially hitting 4% protein in the next couple of years. And we have some people that have already hit it. What is the actual potential for breeding? I've heard a figure mentioned that's associated with it that we could potentially double meat solids output in terms of breeding potential.
Yeah, and I'll tell you the maths behind it very, very quickly. So the key is double milk production per cow, right? I didn't say double milk production per lactation, right? So how do you increase milk production? You tell me, no doubt, you select the bulls with the high PTA for fat and protein, right? That's the high genetic merit for the fat and protein. Easy peasy, right? We know what it does. We're improving that by 1% per year. Okay, management is doing its bit, increasing it also by 1% per year. So that's 2% per year. Okay, over a 20-year period, that's 40%. Our lactation lengths on average now are around 279 days. Why? Because our calving date was getting later. By being able to pull that back, keeping our drying off date the same, we can extend our lactation, right? So there's a 4% per lactation to be gained there. So that's 4% multiplied by the number of lactations. So that's another around 10 or 12%. Then I think this is where the real one, and this is where Philip, I think, is going to get the gains, is in longevity. So, right, a mature cow yields 29% that of a first lactation cow. So if you have cows living for longer, your mature herd yield is increasing. Our target is 5.5 lactations per cow. By going from where we currently are to 5.5 lactations per cow, that's a 40%. So 40% times 40 plus 40 times 10 plus other attributes brings you up to a 100% increase. And based on the challenge then is how do we feed this animal? But we're seeing this great research from Mike Egan and like in Moore Park on the clover and stuff like that. And I think we can easily achieve it.
Okay. So is there a risk that we could go too far with the breeding though? Like you're saying that we can easily achieve it, but at the same time, like we've gone from a situation where we were looking at maybe 450 kilos of solids being a target to where 550 is quite easily achievable. Well, easily achievable might be a bit of an overstatement, but lots of people are aiming for that now at this stage. That's an extra 100 kilos of milk solids. That energy has to come from somewhere. Have we the same changes happening in grass varieties and so forth to match that?
Yeah, well, but that's why I just don't like talking about kilos of milk solids. It's profit at the end of the day, and it's sustainable profit, doing it in a socially responsible manner. And that's going to drive it. So to answer your question, if that extra 100 kilos of milk solids is coming from imported feed, maybe that's not good. Neither good economically or neither good socially or neither good from a security perspective. We saw a great example of this year when concentrate prices went up. But Philip, you're yielding some massive yields these days.
Yeah, I mean, look, we did 570 kilos of milk solids, 578 kilos of milk solids last year, but it wasn't an unusual year. We fed a lot of meal, but we do about 540, I suppose, of a normal year. Like, and it's not an extreme cow by any matters of means. But just would like to take you up down on the maturity of the herd, right? I mean, is there a potential negative in that, like to keep cows healthy? Lameness, mastitis, cell count. Is that going to be an issue?
Yeah, you'd think so, wouldn't you? But it's actually the opposite, Philip, because you talked about your fertility, right, in 1990. I know 44% conception, I think is what you said. So your empty rate might have been 30%, right? You'd no opportunity, what we call voluntary culling potential. So you couldn't cull the one that was kicking in the para, high cell count, bad mastitis. Your fertility, what's your infertile rate now?
Sure, so 10%.
10%, right? So if you're looking
and I suppose it's relative to the number of weeks as well. So 10 to 11 weeks,
okay.
At 10%.
10%, yeah. Right? We're probably saying, Stuart, 18, 20% replacement rate. So now you have a 10%. You previously couldn't cull any cow with high cell count or mastitis. Now you can cull 10% of them. And as your fertility gets better, especially if we go down the sex semen route, there's a massive opportunity to cull those animals. Yes, health becomes a bit like ourselves, gets worse as you get older, but we can kind of mitigate that by voluntarily being able to cull. So it's really good, and we can get that extra yield. Now, the big question for me, and I think if I was to look at the EBI, I'd say the weakest part of the EBI, Mags, you come in here, is probably the health, right? And good, strong genetic evaluations are predicated on good data. And we really don't have good data, good health data, right? We okay, mastitis data, okay, lameness data, like the transition cow time, like tetany, milk fever, LDAs, with no data. So there could be bulls there. We know they're there that are throwing cows that are more prone to tetany. Like we know the Jersey is more prone as a breed to milk fever, right? So can we identify those, right? And I think that's some area I think we really need to work on. Maybe this ag tech and these tools can help us to generate this data, but to do the genetic evaluations, we need that data.
So that's some of the area that you're looking at, obviously, in Vistamilk. But I suppose just one final question, Donagh, before we move on to Margaret. And it's kind of slightly tied to maybe what you've just been saying about in relation to the health. Are there any negative factors that have been that having more beef coming into the dairy EBI could go in terms of working against milk traits? So, or can we actually again identify the animals that maybe have the better beef index, but also have the milking ability that we were looking for as well? So that kind of that trade-off and sustainability, I suppose, is the question really.
Right. There's kind of two parts. Let's answer the first one first. It shocked me, but when I stand back from it, it actually makes sense. You take beef out of the EBI, your genetic gain, rate of genetic gain improvement in milk actually drops, because what the beef is doing is kind of making the cow a bit bigger, which we know yields a bit more. So it's actually counterintuitive to one extent. Your next question is, can we get both? Yes, we can. And prove to me that we can get both. Well, some people said to me 20 years ago, you can't have a bull with good milk and good fertility. Yeah. And now we can. No, we can. So now lads are telling me, you can't have a bull with good milk and good beef. I said, well, we did it. We've proven. It goes back to the point I said about a snake oil. We've proven. We've done it. So let's do it. But it's the breeding program that's going to drive. Same with the dairy beef index, right? Can we get bulls, good beefing characteristics and easy calving? Yes. Are they there? Not really at the moment. But they weren't when we introduced EBI either. And you saw the graph, give us a few more years, then we'll get them.
Okay. So Margaret, just moving on to you. So Donnagh's spoken a lot about the bull side of things there. I suppose where we're beginning to push farmers now is to be more selective around the females that they're using, obviously for breeding. Expansion phase has gone through now. We're trying to get as many replacements on the ground. Now we really want to get good quality replacements on the ground. So the work that you would have done as part of your PhD a couple of years ago would have been on the cow index, and people will associate that with culling. But we were just going to talk about it today in terms of the context of how it can be used for actually breeding decisions as well. So first, I suppose I'll ask you to maybe explain it a little bit. How does it tie in with breeding? Because I know you're very conscious of that you don't want it too associated with the breeding side of things, but as I said, it has a role, and you have a few examples that you're going to show us here on the screen in terms of how it can influence the choices that people are making on their farm. So I suppose, again, just explain the concept of cow first, and then we'll go into the examples.
So yeah, the Cow Zone worked. Look, it was launched there at the end of 2017, and the idea behind it is to look at the profit of your cows in your own herd. So it's this one now, it's just a management tool. It is not for breeding. So I make that clear distinction. EBI is your breeding tool. But where a cow is kind of coming more topical is, we use that towards the end of the lactation in terms of wanting to cull our cows, but some people are actually using it just before the breeding season because they want to identify these voluntary culls that Philip mentioned there earlier as well in his herd. We are seeing herds now having more opportunity to get rid of these poor health cows like Donagh suggested there, and so forth. So this cow index actually identifies all that for you. So rather than you going pulling out all your reports on milk recording, cell count, lay calvers, all this tool, and it's just a tool that, it give you some support in your decision making. It ranks your cows from best to worst in terms of their expected profit for the rest of their lifetime. So you wouldn't use for your breeding decisions, but just before you go off, picking up your catalogues to pick your bulls, you should just have a quick look at your own cows first and see, is there any cows that you don't even want to breed? Are there cows you definitely do not want to see this time next year? So what I would suggest to people is, if you are milk recording and you are herd plus, you should be able to run your cow index. And what I have here on the screen is just an example of a herd. This is a real herd. Now, to be fair to the herd, it has excellent data. So look, again, what we were speaking about there a minute ago, having good data, you're going to get better results. So this herd has records in terms of their milk recording, their cell count, their limbs, excellent recording going on. So the more you put in, the more you get out. But this is just the end of the cow rankings there. So, first there's the involuntary culls. There's nothing you can do about them. That's not a decision for you to make. They're empty. They're going to go anyway. They've culled themselves out of the system, but you might milk them to the end of the year. So I just have them marked there. This farmer here has actually marked a cow A there for being marked for culling themselves. So I don't know what the reason is. It's only a computer system, but there's obviously a reason there. Maybe it was an injury. Maybe it was a health reason. They just do not want to see this cow. And then there's the empty cows. They're the obvious. But then when you have choices, so just say you do have now this year, just for whatever reason it be in your herd, maybe you do want to reduce your cow numbers over, the stocking rates are under pressure now as well with new regulations. Maybe you do want to cull a few more cows. Have a quick look at the end of your report, and you might see some of these late calving cows, your high cell count cows, poor genetics, and older cows. So I just have them kind of identified there in the screen. It's quite interesting about the cow index is if they've had past history of poor performance, be it cell count mastitis, poor milk solids, the cow index remembers that. And you mightn't remember that. You're busy, it's a big herd, you're just after a big calving season, you're tired. This will do it all for you. So I just identifying there that while what I've marked there from C to F might be very obvious and you're thinking, I don't need this cow index, what I've highlighted here in this slide is the passenger cows, I'd call them. So the cow there in the middle, she is there ranked at the very, very lowest cow value in this person's herd. And she has had poor performance to date. And you might look at those figures and think, absolutely no way, your figures are all wrong. She calved in January. She's a fourth lactation cow. She's only, she's at her prime. What could be possibly wrong with this cow? So again, just going into this particular herd, and look, everyone, the cow index again is relative within your own herd. So some of the figures here might be absolutely fantastic for someone, or for this person, this is the worst fourth lactation cow in his herd. So in the red bars are expected profit for her fourth lactation. So if you compare her to her contemporaries, she's expected to yield 150 kilos less solids than her contemporaries. And if you look at her past performance there, highlighted in the blue, she's been that way every year. So when she was a first lactation, second and third lactation, she was always behind the average cow for that lactation. It's not even the best cow. She's been compared to the average. So look, it's just a tool there to help you. Maybe, you know, this person now might think that, well, yes, she had a very good EBI. I actually might just mark her down as a voluntary cull and I'm not going to breed her. And then with the rest of the cows in your herd, use your EBI and your top EBI bulls for your breeding decisions.
And I suppose the interesting thing there, Margaret, on the previous slide was that there was a third lactation animal you'd highlighted there as well. They had a negative profit figure associated with them as well. So the reason that we're saying about this now is that we're obviously getting to the point where nearly most cows are calved on farms at this stage, and a lot of the cows maybe that are left to calve might be all volunteering themselves to leave the farm potentially. So people have a clean slate here, because when they look at this at the end of the year, if cows actually identified as being in calf, they kind of just get knocked up along the pecking order, and the ones that are empty are obviously closer to the bottom. But this isn't going to have that pregnancy status included here. So it's really identifying them on the basis of their milking performance, their health, as you said, in the form of somatic cell count and so forth. And that's identifying cows that you should really be considering removing. And I suppose, Philip, it brings me on to you, because again, talking to you earlier about it, you have a scope to actually cull these cows out. You're probably more inclined to just not put them in calf because your stocking rate well aligned to what you're capable of growing in your normal year. You mentioned the drought earlier, obviously, but in a normal year, you're able to carry the cow numbers that you're carrying. So you're not culling from the point of view of trying to reduce numbers down, but you are trying to cull cows in the last couple of years. Again, now you were expanding for a number of years. Just outline what you're doing there for.
Yeah, like you said, we were expanding, sure, after the quota year, and we did it all from within. But now we've got a stable herd, and and our policy now is that we breed, keep 20% replacements. We do 5% culling of that we don't breed the cow. So 5% of the mature herd, of the full herd, we don't serve. We expect to get a 10% empty rate, and then we keep another 5% for problems in the spring and just having a little bit of fat in the system. But isn't that an absolutely fantastic tool? The way that it can tell me now at this time of the year, you know, what 5% of the herd that I need to be culling. Do you know what I mean? And I haven't been using it. I was aware of it, and I looked at it a few times up and down, usually at the back end of the year. But I can get great value out of that now at this time of the year, and put that into my sour advice and whatever, and just have those cows marked off at this stage. Great stuff.
So, Donagh, I suppose, again, just coming back to what Philip is speaking about there on culling and what Margaret's talking about as well, there's probably a small bit of a misunderstanding out there when we're talking about increased longevity in herds. There's a comment has been made in some places that the herd is getting old and that they're becoming a little bit decrepit, basically. But that's not actually the way that you're intending this to happen. Like, you're still talking about, Philip is talking about trying to carry a 20% replacement rate there. You still want that 20% replacement rate. So we're still looking to introduce a fifth of new genetics into the herd every year. And so just explain that a little bit more in terms of the age profile is increasing because our fertility is improving. 5.5 lactations is our objective. We're still a good bit away from that at the national level. But people seem to be concerned that if we achieve it, that we're going to have a very old herd and that's going to be counterproductive.
Yeah. So there's two concerns. I think the first one I kind of already addressed is the fact that by having that good fertility, we've shifted the dial from involuntary, where he had no choice, she was knocking calf, as Max has she selected herself, to now he can use this tool here to actually pick the cows that really doesn't like, which probably are the unhealthy ones, right? And the other one then is a genetic gain. A lot of international people, when I say I'm looking for cow longevity, they say you're going to stifle genetic gain, because that was the traditional thought. But now we've got sex semen, right? Completely revolutionizing things, right? So if you have good fertility, you don't need many heifers, right? So with sex semen, you don't need many cows to breed. So what you can actually do now is breed most of your very young animals, your maiden heifers and your first calvers, to sex semen to generate sufficient heifers for the next generation. Because you don't need that many, because your replacement rate is actually pretty low. We know from looking at most profiles, and because genetic gain is happening, is that they are your genetically elite animals. So In the guys that have bad fertility, let's say our international competitors or whatever you want to call them, they have to breed their third and their fourth and their fifth lactation cows, which are their genetically inferior cows. Why? Because they don't have good fertility and they need lots of replacements. So no, increased longevity will give us increased productivity, doesn't have to give us greater health problems. We probably need to mind the cows a little bit more, Philip. Maybe you might have some experience in that. And it can actually increase genetic gain, completely contrary to what we taught pre-sex semen.
Okay, so just one last question then for both of you, I suppose, in terms of the what you're saying there about the breeding from the older cows in the herd. We often get the comment that she's a super performing cow. And I suppose it leads to two questions. She's a super performing cow, but her genetics are saying that she's not superior within that herd. And then we have the young stock coming through, so they've no data behind them. We're talking about good records a second ago. So can farmers have confidence in terms of the figures behind those stock that they are going to deliver? So we have the proof in the cow, in the actual cow standing on the ground as opposed to your cow index now. But the heifer that's out in the shade at this moment in time, or out in the field at this moment in time, they have these really superior genetics. Are they going to deliver? Can we really breed off of these with confidence? And that's a kind of a rhetorical question almost. I know the answer, but I want you to enforce that answer for people.
Well, I think the proof is there. Like, I can show you numerous studies from University College Dublin, from Moorpark, from Weber, from the NASA, the ICBF database, at a population level. So individual animals will fluctuate, right? That's a given, right? And the old cow will fluctuate less than the heifer. So it's a bit like a daughter proven versus a genomic bull. But at a group of heifers, it's analogous to a bull team, right? Bull teams don't move. Individual bulls within the team move. So individual heifers within the team will move, but the bull team or the heifer team on average are 100% accurate if you have probably more than 10 heifers within that group. So it's not a case of take my word for it. I'll give you the evidence. The evidence, next generation herd, Mags, you were involved in the bottomless heifers, genotyped them, 2 groups of them, materialized, right? So it's exactly the same principle.
Okay. So we'll just move on. So approximately 18 months ago, you've mentioned it here already now in terms of the sex semen, major change took place within the Irish dairy breeding industry. The change has the potential to actually accelerate genetic gain on Irish dairy farms quite significantly. So to tell us more exactly about what this change was, which you've already alluded to there, we caught up with Stephen Butler down in Moorpark in order to find out a little bit more.
The current size of the national herd in Ireland requires around 400,000 heifer calves per year. Using conventional semen to generate heifers results in roughly the same number of male dairy calves, which is a sustainability challenge for the dairy sector. Sex semen has the potential to help us deal with this sustainability challenge by generating the heifers required and only a small proportion of low-value dairy breed bull calves. In the past, sex semen use was low because the number of bulls that were available sexed was small and they were usually not the best EBI bulls. In September 2021, Sexing Technologies set up a lab in Moorpark to provide sex semen for the Irish AI industry from the best bulls. The interest and uptake from farmers in 2022 led to a second lab being set up in November of that year to cater for the growing demand for sex semen. Now we're in a great situation where the best bulls are available sexed and farmers can select a large team of high EBI bulls to generate all their replacement heifers. Now is the time for a major shift in farm breeding practices. 1, farmers should use high EBI sex semen on their highest EBI and most fertile dams at the start of the breeding season. This will facilitate accelerated genetic gain in their replacement heifers. 2, farmers should use high DBI beef semen on all other dams from the very first day of the breeding season and at all repeat heats to generate more valuable non-replacement beef calves. On top of the accelerated genetic gain and improvement in the beef calf crop, there are other obvious management and rearing benefits to having all of the heifer calves born together at the start of the calving period. And this is true whether they're rearing them at home or going to a contract rearer, as it ensures a uniform group of 15-month-old heifers at first breeding. In order to meet the current requirement for replacement heifers, the total number of dairy sex semen straws that would need to be used is around 800,000. In 2023, we will potentially get to around 30 to 35% of that target, which is fantastic progress in such a short period of time. Despite this progress, farmers need to continue to increase adoption of sex semen usage on their farms over the next number of years to improve the sustainability credentials of the dairy sector.
So Donagh, there's a question in there from one of the participants. Is there any epigenetic effects, as positive or negative, that are known associated with sex semen? And I might just ask you to explain what an epigenetic effect is.
So, right, an epigenetic effect is where your DNA does not change, but essentially, and there's many different ways, but let's just talk about one of them, where something kind of attaches to your DNA and stops it being expressed. So if you have a milk gene there and you have some sort of a perturbation, like if you're as a fetus, we had a drought this year maybe, right? So it kind of altered things, and a piece of something just clamped onto that milk gene and stopped it being expressed as a calf. So there is no evidence, but there's no evidence in the opposite either. It hasn't really been looked at. To be fair, for epigenetic influences to be, because they go across generations, you need multiple generations. So it'll take a few years to but biologically, I can't see any justification as to why there should be an epigenetic effect.
And it wouldn't be whole scale either. You'd imagine it might be very individualistic in that.
Where we do see epigenetic effects, they account for 1% of the variability.
Okay. Follow up what Stephen has outlined there in relation to the sex semen. What potential extra gain have we from being more selective in our breeding on our cow herd and using sex semen obviously to deliver the females that we want into the future?
Yeah, look, it's a really exciting technology. And it just shows you, doesn't it, that if you have a good technology, the rate of adoption can be absolutely massive. So if we look at what delivers genetic gain, right, there's 4 what we call selection pathways, but it's essentially the bulls and the cows. And like the technology is there, the genomics, all of that, it's there really, it's nearly kind of exhausted. You know, genetic gain will keep going, but I don't really see any step changes in the future from a male perspective. But the sex semen has a massive potential from the cow side, right? Because genetics half comes from the cow and half comes from the bulls, right? So if we look at if you're saying sex semen, right, you use the top average of your herd. So the EBI of the top 50% of cows is €50 greater than the national average. So if you're only mating with the top 50 cows, top 50% of your cows, that's a 50 higher your EBI. The rate of genetic gain in our heifers is around €11 per year. So that's the equivalent of almost 5 years of genetic gain from a heifers. So I think this is really, really exciting stuff.
Okay, very good. So just now that we've discussed the science, what does this actually look like in reality on farms? So to explore this more, we're going to discuss this with Philip Donohoo. But before we talk to Philip, we have a short video to give you a feeling of the farming system that Philip is running here in County Carlow.
My name is Philip Donohoo. I farm here in the townsland of Ballyellen, which is close to the village of Goresbridge. We're in the county of Carlow. Farming 84 hectares, 60 hectares in a milking platform and 24 hectares in an outside block for silage and for young stock. I farm here actually with Kevin Hennessy, who's full-time with me, and we also take usually Kildalton or WIT student in the spring to help them get over the workload. We milk 180 cows in a simple grass-based system, and we rear about 40 replacements every year. So we'd have 40 Frisian heifer calves and approximately 40 bull and heifers ready to go for breeding at this time of the year. The EBI of my herd at the moment is running at 228 for the herd. Our young stock then would be above that. I know that our heifer calves born this year have an EBI, I think, of 296. And the bull and heifers that are going for service now shortly, they have an EBI of about 276 with an improvement in all areas. My breeding has developed over the space over time, I suppose, primarily with the advancement and improvement in EBI. Our historical, I suppose, breeding program would have been that we were traditionally a British Frisian herd here up until about the 1990s, 100% British Frisian. We moved in and used a lot of New Zealand semen
And then with the advancement and development of EBI, we moved on to using high EBI and 100% nearly now Irish bulls because they have the figures that suit.
So Philip, you've outlined there how you're a very, very high EBI herd, black and white herd, and just how does that actually translate into what you're selling to your cooperative?
Okay, I suppose, look, in fear of repeating ourselves, because we did cover some of it earlier on. Yeah, look, on the production side, yeah, 578 kilos of solids last year, but that was half a ton extra meal of a normal year, about 540, 6,000 litres, fat 4.75, and protein just knocking just short of 390. And the fertility side, and yeah, about 85% 6-week calving rate.
Okay, so you mentioned that you went in investigating the role of fertility in your herd, obviously because you had issues with fertility, and EBI was going that direction, and you like your figures, as you said, and you followed it from that point of view. Are you happy with what is delivered for you? Your EBI is in the top 1 or 2% in the country now, so you're a really leading herd in terms of EBI. And it's, as the figures that you've outlined there, are very, very strong figures in terms of production figures. So again, it's going against this theory that EBI and meat production don't go hand in hand. Where are you going to go next in terms of breeding direction, I suppose?
Yeah, and I suppose, look, am I happy? Yeah, certainly, yeah, happy. But you can't look back, like you have to look forward, and we have to, you know, we have to look at the challenges and the opportunities that are there. I'm excited about the whole idea of sex semen. I think that's going to deliver huge potential, as Donagh had outlined, particularly in relation to the being able to breed our replacements from a higher percentage of our better animals. I mean, there's obviously questions and fears that we'd have about that. I would have had a couple of bulls put into AI stations over the years, and the AI stations would test a number of my bull calves every year. But as I follow the sex semen route, I'm not going to have any Frisian bull calves that AI stations would be would say interested in. So I'm concerned, as I'm sure others are as well, about where the future bull teams are going to come in the next number of years. And I put that to Donagh, like, I mean, what's the industry doing about it?
Yeah, it's a great challenge to be in, Philip, isn't it? And it's acknowledged now. So Stephen, even though his video there was on sex semen, running in tandem with that, he's actually running an embryo program as well. So with embryo, we can sex it at a particular age. But of course, a lot of the sex semen is we're going towards females, but we can equally well as go as males. So I think we have to have a dual approach, right? I think we have to work smarter. So we have to look at these embryo transfer nucleus type herds. And as I said, Stephen Butler has been working on that in Teagasc Moore Park for the past few years in tandem with his sex semen, because, as you said, they go hand in hand. And then the bit that Mags talked about, the genotyping. So we need to be smarter in how we pick our cows. And this national genotyping program will increase the accuracy of which we can identify these animals. And probably we really need to look more at probably the business model of how do we incentivize you to take a punt? Because that's what breeding is about. It's about taking a punt, using this outcross animal, doing it enough times that you will get one excellent animal, which is a complete outlier that you can use in that population. So look, definitely on the radar, work in progress, but we will still need buy-in from the Irish dairy farmers in the Gene Ireland program. And this is the beauty of the Gene Ireland program. It's a national program to drive on genetic gain.
Yeah, no, I think, look, it's important that we do support it, because we're the end users, and if the bulls aren't there, we're the ones who are ultimately going to suffer.
So ultimately, the genotyping could identify cows that are within the population being milk recorded, etc., and are doing quite well and so forth, but just aren't being picked up for those different linkages maybe in their DNA that are going to make them super animals, basically.
Exactly, like, right. So simple mathematics, right? You want 10 bulls. 10 bulls out of, you screen 100 cows. That's the top 10%. That's great, right? You screen 1 million cows. You still only want the 10 bulls. Now you're down to 0.0001% of the population. That will drive on genetic gain. But you need to be able to identify those cows with really good accuracy. And that's for the genotyping, but also the good quality data. And we go back to the health thing, Mags. You know, like, we know health transmits across generations. So we want these bull dams. We need good information from a health perspective, because I really do think that this is going to be our next stumbling block, is going to be animal health going into the future.
Okay. Philip, your breeding direction for your own farm, so into the future, you used a small bit of sex semen last year, you plan to use more this year. You're going to become more selective now, and obviously you've mentioned that the cow index there, you find it interesting what Mags has said about that. What's the plan for 2023 breeding season for you?
Okay, yeah, a small bit of sex semen last year, only 20 straws. So this year we're going to use 120 Frisian straws, 60 of which will be sexed, and 60 conventional. So there'll be more than half of our of next year's heifer crop will come from sex semen, and ultimately we're getting that on a more select number of cows from the upper end of our genetic, the genetic makeup of the cows, which is which will drive on, we'd say, genetic gain, and we always talk about genetic gain, and obviously, but it's nice to see it in cash figures as well, and where we can see that, I think, is in production, particularly in production of solids. I'm on the right at 6,000 litres. I'm very close to the going to an upper banding level, which I have no intention of going to. But so rather than just saying, okay, I have to hold my production where it is, I don't want to hold my production where it is. I want to hold my litres where it is, right? So the intention then is to, and we put a strong focus on looking for protein and fat percentages gains, over and above what the genetic potential of the herd and the individual cows, the top 50% of our cows are doing. So we want to, we select criteria way above that, and we don't look at the liters, and well, we do look at them, but it's not one of the main criteria for selecting our bulls.
Okay, so I suppose you've led on to coming to one of the questions that's come in there. What's the desired level of fertility within your herd, do you think then? So it's I'm asking you that specifically. Maybe one of the two you might like to come in and comment on it. Like, as your production is increasing, do you feel your fertility needs to increase to match that?
Well, we've always put as I've mentioned, we've been putting a focus on fertility for a long time. I mean, the expert advice is if you have a fertility sub-index of about 100, you're probably going to have good fertility, assuming, I suppose, your management matches, and we do our best in that regard. So yeah, and our fertility sub-index is there. Now, I'm not going to take my eye off the ball, but I wouldn't use be looking to use a bull would top very, very high fertility if he was subpar on production. His fertility still has to be good, but I want his production to be excellent, so yeah, and in relation to where do I want it to be, okay, the industry target is 90%. We say 6-week calving weight at 85. I'm not going to beat myself up over it, not saying we'll continue to improve, but let's just say I'm busy in February.
So a balanced approach overall in terms of the index that you're trying to achieve as well. Donagh, are you happy, like the €100, as Philip has said, is the industry figure, as the level of milk solids does increase? And again, I accept what you're saying in terms of it has to be profitable. And I think it is from Philip's point of view, it is profitable. And we see herds that are doing Philip solids and are very, very profitable. The ability of that fertility sub-index as it is currently to underpin the fertility in those type of herds.
I've tested it and no issue. Philip is 100% right. My hypothesis was exactly yours. Tested it. No, doesn't seem to make a difference under the current difference that we have in milk solids production. But yeah, Philip is right, lads. If you like 100, 110, good management, and sure, like Philip, you're getting your targets. And what are you? 120, 130 fertility sub-index, are you?
About 102.
102 and 85%. So look, there you are.
Yeah,
good management,
delivering on the ground. Okay, so this is actually a question for Stephen, but I'm going to ask the two of you to have a shot at it possibly. With sex semen, to get a 20% replacement rate at 50 to 60% conception, we would need to use sex semen on 40 to 50% of the herd. So are you suggesting that we use sex semen on the heifers and only the top 20% of EBI cows in the herd, all geared towards the first week of the breeding season, which, coming back to your point about being busy in February, is that a fair synopsis?
I think so, yeah, isn't it? Yeah. So the rule of thumb, Stephen's rule of thumb, let's get it clear, right? For 100 cows to generate 20 heifer calves, live heifers on the ground, 62 straws is what you want.
Okay. And I suppose we're not necessarily saying that that all has to happen in the first week of the breeding season, though. Stephen just basically says that to mitigate against the risk of a poor conception rate, that we may suggest that people would look at that. The heifers definitely synchronized, cows maybe not necessarily so, with heat detection technology, etc.
And I think every farmer has to look at that, as you said, like you might do it, Philip. It mightn't suit your lifestyle, but if you think your fertility is suboptimal, you have to try to mitigate that the best way that you can.
Yeah, okay. So to finish, I would like to thank my three panelists this evening. So thank you, Donagh, Margaret and Philip, for joining me and sharing your knowledge and experience with us. Anyone who wishes to see what we discussed tonight in practice is welcome to attend the farm walk that is being hosted on Philip's farm tomorrow at 11 AM. And I would like to thank our video contributor, Stephen Butler, also, the Teagasc Dairy Specialist team, and our production team of Declan McArdle and Rachel Gregan, without whom there would be no broadcast. We encourage you to take ownership of your breeding policy on your farm, like Philip is doing, to ensure that you do indeed breed better cows in the future that will be profitable, sustainable, and be fit to overcome any future challenges. Thank you very much for tuning in tonight, and we wish you the best for the breeding season ahead.